had a couple of restrictions coming out of World War II, and at the 1950 convention, the Caucasian-only restriction was removed. And then in 1970, the male-only restriction was removed, and that was the last of restrictions on membership. And the only thing that really changed from then to now is that in the late 80s, early 90s, we had a adopted open membership policy. So there's no blackballing or voting people to keep them out of membership. If someone applied and provided an application with fee, they were members. So that made life much easier and, quite frankly, much more beneficial for the fraternity. We had a much greater tapestry in terms of our membership, and it has improved us over the years. In 1970, that was in New Orleans. That's when the male-only restriction came off, and it passed, but not by, it was like pre-law. It passed, but it didn't pass by a wide majority. And it's interesting because one of the key volunteers in the fraternity at that time, who'd been around for 1 million years, was dead set against it. And in 1974, on the floor of the convention in Toronto, the subject of the integration came up, and he stood up in the middle of the debate and said, "Mr. International Justice, I need to make a statement." And he said, "I voted against the admission of women in 1970, and it was the greatest mistake I've made in this organization. We have become so much more with the inclusion of women in our organization than we were beforehand, and they make us much more professional." I won't name the individual, but if you knew him, you know what a great thing that was for him to admit, because he wasn't one to step down very often. About the same time as the 70 convention, there had been an entree made to the fraternity by Phi Delta Delta Law Fraternity, which was the largest attorney for women in the United States, and it went back to about 1916, and it had a number of chapters and a membership of about 15,000. So a negotiation or a merger committee was formed for each of the two fraternities. They corresponded and talked by telephone, and then in 1971, there was a merger committee meeting in the middle of that year at the executive office in Granada Hills, California. The fraternity was represented by Sandy Ray, Don Hudson, and my father. Phi Delta Delta was represented by a woman by the name of Catherine Hall, who was one position removed from having been their president, or as they knew them, high priestess. There was another person by the name of Ross, her first name escapes me right now. Thank you. And then there was Amelia T. Del Vecchio, who was their current high priestess. And they all came together, and after 2.5 days, a memorandum of understanding was drawn up and signed, and it was the basis for the 1972 convention, which was basically two conventions held at the same time at the Town and Country Hotel, one for their group, one for our group, and they ran pretty much autonomously during the course of that weekend, up until the last day, when there was a vote by Phi Alpha Delta as to whether or not to allow the merger to go forward, because the vote had already taken place the day before with Phi Delta Delta. It was, of course, approved, but there was some concern about whether or not the merger was still going to go through, because the night before the vote was to be taken by the Phi Delta Delta group, they had a number of their officers on the 5th floor of the hotel, and right above them on the 6th floor of the hotel was one of our international officers. And this individual managed to get reelected to his position every 2 years, pretty much by putting on an open bar party. and that's what they were doing that night. The party got a little bit out of hand, and they started talking about the merger and how we were going to take all the money from the ladies and leave them hanging. And so on the last day of the convention, the matter was about to come up for vote, and Catherine Hall stood up and said, I want you to know we heard some things last night, and we want to share them with you. And she did about a 5-minute poem about all the words wafting down from above and all this kind of thing. And you could tell who was in that room because all you had to do was look around and you could see the people turning bright red. But it was very classy, very well done. The merger passed, no problems. And so things started to move forward from there. We made certain agreements with them. And one of them was that there would be a final history done for them, and we published that, and there's still copies floating around the fraternity. And then we integrated chapters. But immediately after the convention got over, there was still a concern about whether or not they might want to withdraw because of what had occurred. So the incoming international justice, Sandy Ray, directed that one of our individuals fly to Minneapolis, New York City, and Washington, D.C., and secure 3 of the signatures, with his being the 4th signature to complete the merger. And that was accomplished in 28 hours, and the merger was effective. As part of the merger, the board, the International Executive Board, went from 7 members to 9 members, and an international second vice justice spot was created, and an assistant treasurer spot was created. And Enid Williams-Ross took the second vice justice spot, and the assistant treasurer spot was held by a woman by the name of Commander Delphine McMillan, and she was in the United States Navy. She was one of their auditors and had a much better feel for finance than most of the people who held the position of international treasurer over the years in our fraternity. And so after the first term was up, Enid stayed where she was. Delphine then moved into the treasurer spot. Enid served for 2 terms and then went off the board. She had some health problems. And Commander McMillan wished to remain on, but was told by one of the political mucky mucks in P.A.D. that she was probably going to get knocked off on the third term. And Delphine, being the person that she was, took it in stride and then went out and worked at the crowd like you would never believe, and it wasn't even a close contest, and she stayed on for another 2 terms. So that's the story of that merger.
John, that's a great story. This is Shannon Holland.
Hi.
Hey, can you tell us why Phi Delta Delta wanted to merge?
They were having financial problems. They were kind of at a mid-level with the size that they had. They were expanding more quickly than they could accommodate, and they just got stretched too thin. And they pretty much knew that it was only a matter of a couple of years before the fraternity, as they knew it, was going to end. And they wanted to end it on their terms rather than on real life's terms.
Fair enough. Did they have an administrative office staff?
They did not. Like most professional law fraternities, they did not have a professional staff. They actually had a member who served, name was not executive director, but it was something similar, and she'd been doing it for 6 years. Very competent lady, but she just wasn't able to keep up with the work, and they weren't able to afford staff. To give you an idea, out of all of in the 70s, there were 17 law fraternities. We're now down to 3 law fraternities and the vestiges of 2 others. There's us, there's Phi Delta Phi, except that they became a society because they got tired of having to compete with us. So they no longer have to people can be members of both organizations. It's not a problem. Then there was Delta Theta Phi, and Delta Theta Phi is just about to die. It's being run by two volunteers at a college on the East Coast, and the college is allowing them a room to operate from, and that's about it. But they're actually really hanging on by their fingernails. I get more information about them by going to their Dallas Alumni Senate than I do by going to their headquarters website, which is not maintained very well anymore. Of the three major fraternities, Phi Delta Phi is the oldest. It goes back to 1869. We went, of course, back to 1902, as did Delta Theta Phi. And up until World War II, Phi Delta Phi was the preeminent law fraternity. They were larger, had more chapters, all that kind of good stuff. We recovered more quickly after World War II, and that's basically because of the work of two of our members from 1938 to 1946. Our last convention before the introduction of us into World War II was 1938, and our next convention after that was 1946. So the Supreme Justice at that time was a gentleman by the name of J. Harry LeBrum, better known in the fraternity as Hap LeBrum, who was a lieutenant colonel, and he remained as Supreme Justice for 8 years, and he was assisted by the executive secretary of the fraternity. That was the earlier name for executive director. That was a gentleman that not very many people in our fraternity know, and it's too bad, because Frank Ludwig served our fraternity as executive secretary for 25 years, from 1921 to 1946. And I guarantee you, when he was finished, nobody ever thought that there was going to be anybody else who was ever going to do 25 years as an executive secretary. But he did great work for us. His term ended in 1946. He went directly from being executive secretary to being our Supreme Justice from 46 to 48. Those two gentlemen kept communications open for the fraternity, even though most of our chapters had closed down. And as soon as things started to normalize, they were hot on the button to move things along. And we recovered at a rate of almost 2 to 1 over Phi Delta Phi. And from that point forward, we just continued to grow more quickly than they did in terms of membership and chapter reactivations and new chapters. And that pretty much tells the tale.
That's pretty cool. Go ahead.
John, did you answer? There was a question that came up earlier today, whether there were any women members before 1971.
Yes. First member was initiated in 1970. Her name is Anna Carolyn Fox Hines. Shannon, you may have met her because I know Ed met her not too long ago. And so
I've known her for years. She's wonderful. She still pays dues.
The true benchmark.
Yes.
But yeah, she was initiated at the convention. There was a typo in one of the historical documents that showed it was a couple years after that, and that was not true.
But no unsanctioned members before that.
I don't know that. And the reason I say that is there were a couple of instances where before the race restriction was removed that brothers of color were initiated by chapters basically saying to hell with international. And they were dealt with appropriately for the time. And when the race restriction came off, they were welcomed back into membership. So I have no doubt that there were probably situations along that with regard to sisters. From time to time, when I was administering parts of the law program, we would have situations where chapters had two classes of members. They had international members and they had local members. And the local members didn't have to pay the initiation fee, and that's how chapters made themselves look larger than they were and get past having to, quote unquote, sell the fraternity. that happened on a regular basis for quite a number, about 2 decades actually. We had an agreement with Delta Theta Phi and Phi Delta Phi, and whenever any of the three of us found out about that situation, we would let the other organizations know, and people would deal with it. And it was a very good relationship with always with Delta Theta Phi. They were run by one of their members and his wife in the basement of their home. And they came out and visited our office in Granada Hills once, and their jaws hit the floor when they saw what we had compared to what they did. Just the nicest people, very honest people. We never had any problems dealing with them. Phi Delta Phi, we had a very good relationship for about 22 years with a gentleman by the name of Sam Crutchfield. And my father and I used to kid him that he should have been a Phi Alpha Delta. And he used to kid us the reverse. Same thing, very straightforward. We communicated well, and we addressed issues when they arose for any of the three groups. After Sam left, Phi Delta Phi ended up with an executive director by the name of Tim Wheat. Tim is a great believer in high ethical standards, but apparently only for his own group. He was found to provide us with in the correct information, and whenever we assisted them with letting them know about problems they were having at their chapters, he would tell us they would be taken care of, and they never were. So Tim and I would run into each other at Professional Fraternity Association from time to time. We didn't spend much time together.
Understandable.
Hey, John. John,
Yeah.
could I prompt you to perhaps tell a story or one about another brother who may not be widely known in this circle of folks attending today who would infiltrate some of the opposition, Brother Atlas from Florida?
Alan J. Atlas, Rasco chapter, the Supreme Seconder at many conventions, and he attended a lot of them. Whenever people were nominated for a position, he would second the nomination, and most times move it to be in acclamation. And hardcore P.A.D., good member. He took it upon himself one year when Phi Delta Phi was having a convention in his backyard to show up there. And he stood in the registration line and was asked his name, and he said Dave Johnson. And they promptly credentialed him, and he sat through the convention and left with about an inch of their materials, which he forwarded on to the executive office. And that's when we found out just how badly they were lying to us. According to what they were telling us, they were on about a par with us with initiations for about 10 years. And the fact is they were doing about 50% of what we were doing. And then there were other things in there that were not appropriate for viewing by members of other fraternities. So that was on Alan's own doing. And from time to time, he would say, this is a call from Dave Johnson, and he would have picked up something from another one of their members and he'd share it, and that type of thing. Alan developed cancer many years back. It kept him from attending convention. He was supposed to live 1 year, and he lived 13. And during that time, we became even closer than we were. He taught my wife how to cook kosher. We had weekly discussions. When I was International Justice, he complained. I put out a missive every night recognizing one of our members or a chapter or an event that was going on. And after the first 3, he complained about all my typographical errors. So he became my editor for all of those, and I would give those to him in advance, and he would clean them up, and then we'd put them out. Good brother. I miss him every day.
And he would probably be an honorary member of the Thorn chapter.
He would probably be their justice. But no more a dedicated P.A.D. has there been.
He was definitely an inspiration for the Thorn chapter, that's for sure.
Maybe you can like rename it in honor of him.
I don't think that would go over very well.
That's part of the Thorn chapter. Oh,
He liked to poke the bear.
yeah, yes, he did. And he was good
You
at
need
it.
those members, though.
He did a great job. I'll talk a little bit about, we've had two groups of people in the fraternity over the years called the Three Musketeers. The first group of Three Musketeers was Don Moore, Robert E. Redding, and William Robbie Robertson, all of Taft chapter. District 23 heard from Curtis. They all got involved about the same time at Taft chapter and did very well for their chapter. They stayed involved with the fraternity. They stayed involved with the alumni chapter, and both Don and Bob moved up through the ranks. But the one who didn't was William Robbie Robertson. That was not his thing. He was a behind the scenes guy, and he is responsible for more important things that have gone in this fraternity than most people will ever know. He was the brother who started in 1948 and accomplished it in 1950, getting the race restriction removed. He took a lot of crap back then to do that, but he didn't split it. He stayed involved. He was involved with Don and Bob with putting together the Supreme Court, P.A.D at the Supreme Court. He worked on a lot of other projects behind the scenes for them and some for the executive office. And then starting in 1968, he started working on the last of the restrictions. And he was the prime motivator behind the provision to remove the male-only restriction in 1970. Got it accomplished. Coincidentally, he was inducted into the Distinguished Service chapter at that convention. He, like the other two brothers, bled purple and gold. When he died, he left us a sum of money for our endowment fund, and was always thinking about us and always stayed involved. And he was always there to back up both Don and Bob. And Don Moore went up through the chairs and got up to International Vice Justice and got knocked off by Stan Cohn. That was almost unheard of in that time, but it happened, and it happened because of changing things in the world more than anything else. And he took it all right. It got better a couple of years later when Stan Cohn actually visited him, and they spent some time and kind of mended some fences and that type of thing. But Don was known as the supreme proofreader. Every time my father issued an issue of the Reporter, he would get one of them back in the mail, all marked up with red ink, because Don was a former newspaperman. And so he started sending him the proofs rather than the editions, and much as Alan did for me, Don did for my father. And then there's Bob Redding, and there's no way to say enough things about that man. That brother, he had a vision for P.A.D that few did at that time, in the 50s mainly, and then in the early 60s. He saw us being much more professional, and he worked very hard to achieve that. And P.A.D at the Supreme Court was one of the things. Inns of Court was another one. There's a whole myriad of things. We had a lending library and all kinds of documents that we would send out, a lot of which he authored or saw were authored. And then when he became International Justice in '66, he did it on steroids for that 2 years. And it really changed us quite a bit, and for the better. And it wasn't that we didn't go out and have fun. We just did that on top of the work. But he helped make us much more professional. And it's an interesting thing because the work that he did may very well be the reason that our fraternity is still around. because of the 17 law fraternities I told you about that existed in the 70s, all but 3 were traditionally social. Only 3 had professional components. And that was Delta Theta Phi, Phi Delta Phi, and ourselves. And the only ones hanging on right now are the 3 of us. There's one chapter of Gamma Eta Gamma left, and 1 or 2 of Sigma Nu Phi, and that's it. So the world has changed. And my personal belief is that the reason that we have survived is because of the professionalism. Although we have a couple of younger members on Facebook who don't believe that's the case. They think it's the opposite. So we'll see as time goes down the road. But that was the original 3 Musketeers. Brothers who did a tremendous amount for us. And all 3 of the 3 Musketeers ended up as members of the Distinguished Service Chapter. Then we had the second 3 Musketeers. They all met at the 1970 convention, their first convention for all 3 of them. And that was Norm Owen and his wife Bev, and Larry Krigler, and a young man by the name of Steve Clark. And they all started their careers pretty much at that convention and went from there. If you have the opportunity to talk to Steve, ask him about a program that he ran at Garland chapter called Operation Lay Pro Con. It was a professional program their chapter put on to explain a amendment to their constitution that was being proposed that nobody in the state understood. They went all over. Their members went all over that state explaining that constitutional amendment, and that was Steve's entree to the political world, and he'll tell you. And that's how he ended up moving up and becoming part of the Kitty Corps, and the Attorney General in the state of Arkansas, along with Bill Clinton, at a time when none of their 5 major officers were over the age of 29. Steve's done a lot of things for us. He's opened a lot of doors for us over the years. He was a wonderful host at the 1980 convention in Hot Springs. He opened the doors to us, to the Clintons at that convention, and made us feel very warm and accommodated, even if we had to do some hog calling and honky-tonk singing and some beer sprinkling along the way. But it was a great convention, and he was a large part of that. He was not responsible for the non-air-conditioned buses. That would be my father. My father loved non-air-conditioned buses. Steve then was involved in the pre-law program. He was the justice at the time that it had just been chosen. He's the one that designated me and put the ultimatum on my head, and then pulled it out from under me when the district felt differently. And to this day, he does not believe that I did not put that together. Larry Krigler from Kentucky, a Kentucky gentleman through and through. He did a great job in Kentucky for alumni chapters, as a district justice, and then on the board. Nothing flapped Larry. The world could be coming to an end, and it was just something that he would take in stride and help everyone else take in stride. And good head on the shoulder, and kept us going the right direction. And came back on 2 occasions to temporarily pitch in when district justices were vacant in that area, and has been very generous to the P.A.D. International Foundation with contributions for the last decade or so. Norm Owen. Norm is a very good friend of mine, more than just a brother. We really connected at the 70 convention, as I did with Bev. Bev has been at every convention that he has been, which is every one since 1970. She's as much a P.A.D. as he is, and has done a lot of behind-the-scenes work for us. She stuck in the executive office at the conventions, putting together materials, running around the tables, running errands. And then in 1976, they were supposed to be a casino night on the second night of convention. but not anything had been done to put it together. No company had been called, nothing had been arranged. So a group of us got together, and including Norm and Bev, and in 8 hours we put together a full-scale casino night for that 96 convention. And she was a big part of that. But that was the kind of lady that Bev was. She was also the office manager in his office. Norm was gung-ho P.A.D. There was nothing about P.A.D. he didn't like or absorb. And one of his areas in the practice of law was land issues, and he managed to get the governing board of their local land group agency to rename his street to be Beaumont's Way, which was Beaumont was the name of his law school chapter. That's the kind of P.A.D. he was. He graduated from Cal Western, and then was a DJ in District 3 from there, and then they went to Hawaii for a couple of years, and then they came back, and he got involved first in the LA area for a short period of time. Then they went up to Northern California, and that's what they really loved, and they spent the rest of the time there. And he was a District 2 justice for a period of time, subbed on a couple of occasions, and kept things going. And he had a real problem, though. He wanted to be on the board, and he just couldn't put it together. He got knocked down a couple times. So he finally said, okay, I'll do one step below that. So he ran for Chief Tribune and got elected Chief Tribune in 1976. So he figured he'd spend a number of years there and then move up. But in 1977, the international historian had a personal problem and had to resign from the board. And so the lower two people under him moved up, and a position opened up for what was known as international proctor at the time. And the board tapped Norm to move up to the spot in international proctor. And that's how he finally made it onto the board. And he was a good board member, did a good job, and just three really wonderful individuals.